Hello, I'm Isabel Melton. I'm in my second year here at the University of Montana, and I hail from Helena, Montana. I am double majoring in political science and history through the Davidson Honors College while serving as an intern with the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Center. I'm honored to welcome you to our Mansfield Dialogue, Connecting with Voters and Flipping Seats. Tonight, we feature campaign managers Shelbi Dantic and Amanda Stevens in a conversation moderated by NBC Montana Evening anchor Maritza Giorgio. I want to thank our audience for joining us this evening and for the questions you've already submitted that we've integrated into the discussion. A Democrat from Montana, Mike Mansfield served in Congress for 34 years and was our nation's longest serving Senate Majority Leader. Known for his integrity and commitment to the people of Montana and our nation, Mansfield noted that, quote, "Differences can be bridged, solutions can be found, concessions can be made. It's much better to take an inch than to take nothing at all. I don't believe that winning is everything, though it's very desirable. I don't think there's anything wrong in losing if you do it the right way," end quote. The Mansfield Center was endowed by an act of Congress in 1983 to carry forward this legacy of statesmanship, ethics, and civility in public affairs. The center's mission is to foster a national dialogue of respect and civility to restore trust in our national institutions, our founding documents, and our public policy makers. Our dialogues are designed to foster civil exchanges of ideas from diverse viewpoints, reinforce the importance of democratic institutions, and examine the role that ethical values play in public life. Tonight's dialogue, featuring strategists who work with Republican and Democrat candidates, supports this mission to promote civil discourse. We are pleased to welcome Shelbi Dantic and Amanda Stevens as they describe how they connected with voters and achieved victories that flipped seats in the House of Representatives. I'm also delighted to introduce our moderator for this evening, Mansfield Advisory Board member, Maritza Giorgio. She's an evening anchor at NBC Montana, where she started her professional broadcasting career in 2006 while still a junior at the University of Montana. Ms. Giorgio specializes in reporting on politics, wildfires, addiction, and, more recently, the COVID-19 pandemic and its impacts on Montana. The Montana Broadcasters Association awarded her the 2019 E.B. Craney Award for Television Broadcaster of the Year. Ms. Giorgio lives in Missoula with her husband and son and has countless relatives across the great state of Montana. She's a fierce believer that one can make a difference and everyone should try. Ms. Giorgio, thank you for serving as our moderator for tonight's dialogue. Please take it away.
All right, thank you so much, Bella, and thank you to everyone joining us this evening. It's hard to believe it's been more than 4 months since Election Day. It was a big year, but as we're seeing, elections have consequences, and control of the House and Senate is crucial to a party and its agenda. The US Senate is a perfect example of how flipping a seat or two can have major impacts on what gets passed and what doesn't. And tonight we're going to talk more about flipping those seats, the process behind it, and how campaigns are constantly evolving to connect with voters. As Bella said, we're joined by congressional campaign managers Shelbi Dantic and Amanda Stevens. Shelbi managed the campaign for Representative Carolyn Bourdeaux of Georgia, the only Democrat to flip a Republican-held House seat in this cycle. She's the first woman ever to even hold that seat. Dantic has also worked on campaigns for Senator Jon Tester and former Governor Steve Bullock. Amanda Stevens has a background managing campaigns at the local, state, and federal level for Republican candidates. Most recently, she ran Representative Nicole Malliotakis' campaign, flipping the seat in favor of the Republicans, and it's currently the only GOP-held congressional seat in New York City. Her candidate defeated an incumbent by 6 points, despite being outspent 3-1. So we're going to start with introductions right now, and each panelist telling us more about their backgrounds and the campaigns they ran. And we'll start with Shelbi. Take it away.
Well, thank you, Maritza, for facilitating this conversation. Thank you so much, Dina and the Mansfield Center. I'm so honored to be back here at my alma mater. The ethics and government lessons I've learned through the Mansfield Center during my time at the University of Montana have really stuck with me throughout my career. And as I go around the country and say I come out of Montana politics, having the ethos of Mike Mansfield is always something in the back of my head. So I actually got my start on campaigns by working with the Montana Public Interest Research Group. During the first year of college, I was on a campaign to protect Glacier National Park from oil and gas drilling right outside the border from proposed drilling. After that work, I worked my way through college at UM on staff with Montana Conservation Voters as their political director. For 6 years, we worked on races from city council to Congress, and that was nonpartisan work. We endorsed both Republicans and Democrats. Probably most Montanans, if they're on the call tonight, will know mostly about our Montana Public Lands campaign, Public Lands and Public Hands. I worked with a lot of awesome women in conservation on that, including Keisha Booker from the Montana Wilderness Association. We had the biggest rallies that the Montana State Capitol had ever seen. During my time at MCV, we recruited, trained, and elected conservation champs. So up and down the ballot, I always say from city council to Congress. And in 2016, we played a big role in the re-election of Governor Steve Bullock. President Trump won Montana by 20 points that year, but the work that we did ensured re-election for Governor Bullock by 4%. After that, I joined Senator Tester's re-election campaign as his deputy campaign manager. At the time, that was the most expensive race Montana had ever seen, but it's been dwarfed by the 2020 cycle this year. During that campaign, we had an unprecedented digital ad series featuring Native American leaders from every Montana tribe, voicing their support for Senator Tester in their indigenous languages. And then after that campaign in early 2019, I went down to Georgia, where I was the campaign manager for Congresswoman Carolyn Bourdeaux. I guided our campaign to victory through a primary challenge, which was at the heat of nationwide protests for racial justice. And Georgia's 7th district's actually in the northeastern suburbs of Atlanta. In Georgia, you need 50% of the vote in a primary to avoid a runoff. And we did just that, garnering 41% over our nearest competitor in that 6-way race. Then in June of 2020, we turned our attention to the general election. Our campaign highlighted Congresswoman Bourdeaux's experience leading an economic recovery. She was the Senate budget director during the Great Recession and had worked with Republicans and Democrats to help balance the state budget during that really critical time in Georgia. And she even received a special recognition from the Senate Republicans in Georgia for her significant service to the state. We also worked on holding our opponent accountable. Our opponent was spreading misinformation about the vaccine, social distancing. He was downplaying the severity of the coronavirus from the start. And we felt like this was particularly egregious because he was an ER doctor. We did all the conventional campaign tactics like the ads and the mailers, but we also ran one of the biggest field campaigns for a congressional race in the country. We centered our outreach to meet the diversity of the district, which included multilingual turnout efforts in Spanish, Mandarin, and Hindi. Last but not least, we ran a dual track voter protection program, and I'm happy to talk more about this in the conversation, to rise to the challenges that voters face casting a ballot in Georgia. The campaign recruited local attorneys, trained notaries, and over 90 volunteers to assist with any voting problems, both in early vote and in election day voting. Ultimately, as Marisa said, we won our race, which is great. And I actually hadn't heard that Mike Mansfield quote about winning, but I very, very much enjoyed that. It was the only red to blue flip in the country. And then we turned around and helped deliver Georgia's 7th district for Senator Warnock and Senator Ossoff in January's runoff. So again, so excited to be here. I'm very excited to have a counterpart in Amanda. Always love to have more lady campaign managers in this work, and excited to hear from her as well. And thanks so much for having me.
All right, Amanda.
First, thank you guys for hosting tonight's discussion. It's something that I'm very excited to talk about and also answer some of the questions that are going to come on later. So again, my name is Amanda Stevens, and a little bit about myself. I first began my career in politics in 2015. I was the campaign director for a write-in campaign for local mayoral election, which was successful here in Michigan. After that, I moved on to become a field director for a local congressional campaign. I worked for the Michigan Republican Party, handling the field operations in a portion of Southeast Michigan. And then I went on to become the campaign manager for a contested delegate race in Virginia, where we successfully elected a Republican in a 6.5 point Dem seat. After that, and most recently, I was the campaign manager for Nicole Malliotakis in New York's 11th Congressional District. So for those who aren't familiar with New York's 11th District, it does encompass all of Staten Island and a portion of Southern Brooklyn. It was a seat that in 2018 was flipped during the Blue Wave and became one of the most contested congressional races in the 2020 election cycle. So a couple points that I will touch on. I know everyone kind of wants to know, how do you go about flipping a congressional seat? One of the most important aspects of campaigns is fundraising. In order to execute any strategy or implement any plan that you do have, you have to have the funds in order to do so. With that, my favorite portion of campaigns and political targeting is what is called deep canvassing, or what I would like to describe as building a relationship with voters. This is something that we actually saw implemented on a larger scale in 2008 for President Obama's presidential election. It was the first time that really there was an investment in developing a relationship with voters. So this was something that during my years on campaigns that I love implementing. It's important that when we go to a door and we're talking to a swing voter, that we have a real conversation with that voter. Typically during the ID phase of a campaign, you identify whether a voter supports the candidate, is undecided, or is opposed. And if they're undecided, typically the canvasser will hand them the campaign literature and hope that that campaign literature motivates them to vote for the candidate. Deep canvassing is really an investment in that conversation with the voter. It's important to understand where that voter is coming from, what issues that they're most concerned about. And that information getting back to the campaign allows us to effectively target and continue those conversations with that voter. So with that, there's a few different components with building that relationship. So after the canvasser, talks to a voter at the door and length, the follow-up is very important. We have to continue that conversation with the voter. That follow-up can look like writing a personal postcard to the voter, maybe highlighting some of the things during the conversation, answering a question that maybe the voter had that the volunteer didn't know how to answer at the time. And a second component, which is something that you don't necessarily always see on a larger campaign, is have the candidate call that voter directly. A lot of times voters, especially undecided voters, don't expect to have an opportunity to talk with the candidate, but by opening that line of communication, you develop a level of trust between that voter and the campaign and the candidate. So at the end of the day, by continuing these conversations and developing that relationship early with the voter, it will prevent some of the mudslinging that's going to occur down the line, from getting that voter to not vote for your candidate. So it's really important to foster those relationships early with the voter. So when it comes to the election, you're able to have that voter in your camp. And so I look forward to answering some of the questions that you guys may have this evening and flipping a congressional seat.
All right, thank you both, Amanda and Shelbi. And we have a lot of questions and some coming in, a little bit of overlap, so I'll do my best to hopefully get to everything here. I want to know, is flipping a seat becoming increasingly more difficult with our polarized political climate? And how do you reach apathetic voters or people who don't see the point in participating in the voting process? Whoever wants to start.
I guess I'll go ahead and jump in. I don't think so. I think at the end of the day, you have a large base of voters that aren't necessarily tied to a political party. And if you actively work to talk with those voters, you can make sure that they turn out to vote. You can find out what's preventing them from turning out to vote. So by having that conversation with them, you can encourage and get them to turn out to vote. And you can really, impact an election.
Yeah, I think the reaching apathetic voters, sort of just pulling back the curtain from campaigns and also just making sure that they can engage in the process by protecting voting rights are two really big pieces to making sure that the electorate can stay engaged. I will touch on that, some people think that there's certain seats that will always be red and always be blue, and I do think that that's mostly true. But it's an interesting year. It's a redistricting year. Redistricting means that the legislatures and redistricting commissions across the country are going to redraw the districts in the congressional level, and that happens every 10 years. And so a lot of these districts that have been historically super red or super blue, I think this year will look differently.
So you talked a lot about spending, Shelbi, and I'm wondering, we saw record spending in many places this last cycle and a lot from outside spending groups. So I'm wondering, how much do those groups help or hurt a campaign, especially one trying to reach swing voters?
Yeah, I think a lot of these groups have membership organizations and can be seen as trusted messengers like Planned Parenthood and conservation voters. I think the more pervasive problem is that these super PACs don't have to play by the same rules that Amanda and I do, in that they don't have a campaign contribution limit. And so they are not limited by the $2,800 that we can take as a campaign. They can spend endlessly, and that's when you hear about the dark money, that's sort of the ethics that we're wagering there is like, we don't know who's spending this money, and it's not being reported in real time, and they're weighing in a really, really big way in these races.
Amanda, did you want to add anything on that one?
Yeah, so I'll jump in and say that outside spending can have huge consequences on an election. A lot of times, the idea is you want to saturate your message to voters to get them to vote for you. So if you have a ton of outside money being poured in from groups in opposition of you as the candidate or your campaign, they're going to start oversaturating the market with their negative message, which is going to turn people away from voting for you, especially those swing voters. So I think things get really interesting when you have, outside money from both sides being poured in. At that point, that's when you start seeing commercials every other second, and people just start tuning them out. But at the same time, if the PAC is for you or supportive of your campaign, it can be helpful. But if it's a PAC that is in opposition to you, it can hurt your campaign.
Yeah, and speaking of saturating the market, I work in TV. I hear about it every election cycle about the campaign ads, and I hear it all the time. Do mailers, text messages, and those campaign ads actually work to change voters' minds?
So if they're done effectively, they can. Obviously, you have your message that you're trying to get across. So whether your platform is through text messaging, through mail, or through TV, if done correctly, you can successfully saturate your message that is motivating towards the voters that you're targeting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't live under a rock. I know that the texts and the mailers and the commercials very much annoy people. In fact, I was buying a cart the other day, and the salesman asked me what I did, and I told him, and I said it might be the only profession that's more hated than yours, which they got a kick out of. But we would not spend millions of dollars on these things if they didn't work. I think for every 10 text messages where people are annoyed, I had some great conversations via text and on the phone with people who needed help getting their ballot, understanding what the deadlines were for requesting it, learning about the down ballot candidates, what their record is. And, a lot of people were really grateful for that help. In fact, one just conversation that I had, and I think it was July or August, was a 92-year-old woman who had always voted in person and was at a nursing home, and she was not, willing to risk her health, but she had no idea how to navigate, the mail ballot process, how to request one. And we were able to, get her a form to request it and talk her through that process. And it can be simple, but it's often not. And so, people are grateful for that help, even though it does annoy some other people for sure.
And so many people voted by mail this election cycle because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So how did that pandemic play into this specific cycle, and what challenges and successes did it bring forward?
I can take that one. So, knocking on doors is actually one of my favorite campaign things to do, getting outside. It was really, really hard not to be able to do that. We wanted to keep people, both our staff on the campaign and our voters and volunteers, safe. But there were some benefits. It was a great opportunity with people being online, much like this session. People can engage from their house, so that transportation and childcare is less of an issue in engaging our volunteer base. With the lighter course load that some universities had, I will say we had an awesome internship program. I'd love to hear, Amanda, if you had that same experience. We had amazing, hundreds of interns from diverse backgrounds from all across the state of Georgia. So sort of not being bound by geography as much. And then during the campaign, we actually launched a first of its kind app called Electify, where we sort of gamified campaign volunteering. People were downloading the app and they'd get points for different volunteer actions, like, calling on their neighbors or texting their friends. And so, we had to innovate. We had a Facebook virtual field office. We did hours upon hours of Zoom, and our campaign team really did a lot of work on innovating quickly. But I think that, campaigns, one of the best parts about them is it's very nimble. To be a good campaigner, you have to be nimble. And so I think probably as far as industries that responded quickly to the pandemic and the changing lay of the land, I do think campaigns sort of addressed it head on and quickly changed tactics.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say that COVID definitely impacted the way that you operate a campaign. I don't think anybody was, prepared for what was going to happen. And being in New York City, where it kind of became an epicenter of the pandemic, it really shifted things. But it also allowed us to, be innovative and conduct teletown halls and have doctors as guest speakers to kind of answer the concerns of people in the community at a time when we didn't have much information about what was going on. So it definitely changed a lot in how we initially were operating our campaign. But as Shelbi kind of hit, you become, innovative in the things that you do. So you take advantage of things like Zoom. You can't have in-person fundraisers. It's something that you have to do virtual now. With that, we actually did have a ton of people that reached out too, because they didn't know what to do. They were stuck at home. They wanted to help make phone calls, send text messages, write postcards, be active while they're sitting at home. So it was definitely something that, was a huge challenge, but, at the end of the day, in a different way, brought people together.
All right, thank you. We hear so much about these political hot potatoes, these issues, and this comes from one of our participants on tonight's Zoom. They want to know, what role do issues compared to party affiliation play in a campaign? Whoever wants to start.
I can start. I think they play a really big role. I think we talk about, because you never just have a candidate talk about who they are, they talk about where they're at on the different issues. I think this cycle, everybody talked a lot about healthcare. I don't know whether that was right or wrong, but it was at the top of polling, I think, on both sides of the aisle. And I also think it's a way to, as you're a volunteer for the campaign or you're talking one-on-one to a voter, one of the first questions we ask are what issues are important to you, because you do have a short time attention span of the voter that you're talking to, because they're making dinner for their kids when you call them. And so really getting down to like, what do you care about? Here's where this candidate is at on the issue that you care about is an important piece of, effectively talking to voters.
Yeah, so you're always going to have, different segments of your voters who vote strictly party lines. If they're Republican, they're always going to vote Republican. If they're Dem, they're always going to vote Dem. And then you have different tiers of people that are likely to vote Republican or likely to vote Dem, but are also, able to be swayed. And those are voters that really care about certain issues. So you identify those issues, whether it's through your ID phase of talking to them at the door, conducting polling and finding out, what issues they're concerned about and what motivates them. So, you're going to have your party line voters, but then you're going to have a huge portion of voters that care about certain issues. And it's about having the right conversations with those voters.
Okay, another viewer question is, primaries tend to push candidates to extremes. How do candidates then move back to the middle in order to flip a seat?
Well, I will say in our primary was a 6-way race, but ultimately the primary election ad that we ran was almost identical to the general election ad that we ran. And I think that if you have a strong candidate and a strong message, actually, and a strong campaign, the primaries, that sort of doesn't work as sort of like a left flank or left pressure as much as it does, fortify. I think the good part about primaries is it makes people build up a campaign infrastructure earlier than they would normally.
Yeah, I think Shelbi hit it on the head. Having a strong campaign, especially through primary, can help you prevail through that primary. I think, with primaries, it's not so much, that candidates are going, to the far left or far right and then trying to change their message during the general election. A lot of times that's how candidates or campaigns get in trouble. But I think it's really the candidate has to be true to themselves. During the primary, you're going to be talking about different issues than you are going to be talking about in the general election. So the issues and what you're talking about might be different, but it's not necessarily about changing your views.
All right, I have this question written in several different ways from our audience members, so I'll try to give it justice here. Generally speaking, they want to know how you pick a candidate you support. And this one specifically says, do campaign managers need to believe passionately in their candidates' positions? Or is it simply enough to look at this as paid work, drawing on your expertise with the objective of winning?
I think we work way too long of hours to not believe in what we do. Amanda can disagree with me, but I don't think she will. So really I'm looking at, do they share my values? As a manager, I think for candidates, I'm looking for, are they gonna work hard? Running for office is a lot of long hours and a lot of hard work. So I think, if they're hitting those two things, I'm gonna be happy working for them. But yeah, when you're working at midnight or 6 a.m., it's not enough to just be a political hack, I don't think.
Yeah, again, Shelbi hit that on the head. I have to believe in the candidate, too. I can't just work for somebody just because they are Republican. I have to have a good relationship with them. As Shelbi mentioned, you spend a lot of hours. It's not your typical 9 to 5. So you really have to kind of feel that inner passion to get that candidate over the line.
Okay, now going back to COVID for a minute, because everything comes back to COVID this year especially. This is from a viewer, what parts of COVID campaigning, like remote communication, no door-to-door, virtual rallies, will continue in the future? And what will be discarded after the pandemic fades?
I think Amanda already talked about this briefly, but virtual fundraisers, I do think that those will stay, because before the pandemic, candidates were driving across their district, across a state to hit the different fundraisers. And that takes a lot of campaign time. And we say in campaigns, one of the only non-renewable resources is time. You are up against a shot clock. And so leveraging the candidates' time in that way might be something that stays virtual. But I think the retail politics, I remember in 2018, Senator Tester would go to Costco and eat a hot dog in the food court and meet voters. That I'm so desperate to get back to. Actually, it's one of the best parts about campaigns is meeting people across the country. And I don't really think that there is a replacement for that. And I do think that will come back as soon as we're safely able to do so.
Okay, so Amanda, did you want to touch on that?
Yeah, I'll just say that, with what happened during the pandemic and, the new use of Zoom and finding different avenues, I think a lot of these will, continue to occur alongside with in person when we are able to. It cuts down on costs. It sometimes will allow you, depending if you're doing an online rally or hosting an online fundraiser, you're able to have more people get involved than if it was an in-person event. So I think you're going to continue to see a combination of this. And then, when we can go back to in-person politicking, we'll see it used in a combination.
All right, this is another question from one of our viewers tonight. How do you think President Trump's efforts to discredit the results of the election that he lost will impact the 2022 midterm election?
So I will jump in here. I believe that for the 2022 midterm elections that we will take back the House. I think it's important at the end of the day that people have faith in the integrity of our elections. Right now, you kind of see too what's happening in Iowa's 2nd Congressional, where they're now trying to overturn that certified election. And at the end of the day, that kind of causes an apathy amongst voters who then kind of feel, well, does my vote count? So I think it's important that, we continue to have conversations and ensure, there's integrity in our election, but also that people get involved, become poll workers, become poll watchers, and learn more about the process.
Shelby, do you want to add anything on that?
I mean, I do think, especially in the Georgia runoffs, we saw that the president's rhetoric hurt Republicans. And it was particularly interesting in Georgia because we were working off their rules. The Republican governor, the Republican secretary of state, and the Republican legislature, set the election rules. And then they said that the playing field wasn't fair. And ultimately, I think that, we saw on January 5th that their voters didn't come out. And I think that hopefully that, what Amanda said, Republicans are recognizing that enfranchising people and talking about voting rights and the integrity of our elections is really, really important. Because you see Secretary Rosenberger in Georgia, the Republican Secretary of State. I think he's taking more incoming from his own party than he is from his Democratic opponents.
All right, this is a Facebook question. How are you recruited by candidates in other states? And then how do you adjust and adapt to new issues and cultures that you may not be familiar with? I was thinking this too when Shelby was talking about the whole runoff process, which seems foreign to me covering politics here in Montana.
Yeah, so I think that, there's like a consultant class that recruits candidates and managers and helps guide campaigns. These are folks that have been doing it for longer than Amanda and I have. So they're an old steady hand at this work. I think that, I have taken like the Montana hard work ethic and just applied it to the campaigns. But I think, Montana politics forges you in fire. Like it is a red state at times, and it is hard for Democrats to win elections, but ultimately you're talking to people about their values. I also think that, coming from a small state, you gain credibility in drops and you lose it in buckets. And that's, you know, another Montana campaign tactic that I've taken to other races. I did really relish the opportunity to work in Georgia. You know, coming from Montana, I had a lot of, you know, rural and work with Indian country that we had done, but I hadn't worked with the many diverse communities in Georgia's 7th district. And it was a great learning experience to, you know, work with the Black churches. And, you know, one of the best moments on the campaign was Ambassador Andrew Young, a civil rights icon, you know, hosted a roundtable for Congresswoman Bourdeaux. He said that she was that a campaign is a marathon and that this woman is a long distance runner, and something that will stick with me. And he recorded, you know, radio ads for us and stuff like that. And, you know, working in the South, I think gave me a whole other new set of skills that I'll take with me to, you know, future campaigns too.
I'll jump in here and say, so it's kind of weird, I guess, how it works out. But at the end of the day, you know, networking and working hard, you know, the work that you put into a campaign is seen by people that you might not necessarily interact with, and that falls into the consultant world. So, you know, the work that you conduct is something that a lot of people outside of your own personal circle do see. And that's how, you know, you can get reached out to about going to a different race in another state. And one of my favorite aspects has been able to work in Michigan, work in Southern Virginia, and then go to New York City and work in one of the most politically diverse areas. And that's something that one thing I'm passionate about is understanding, you know, why people vote a certain way that they do. I guess that's the political scientist in me. So being able to travel to these different areas and really understand and learn these voters is something that I'm passionate about and love. So it is a very unique experience.
So as we have this dialogue that's very civil and very informative, I'm going to go to this next viewer question that I think is important to a lot of people. And that is, what are the specific suggestions you have for reducing destructive and poisonous barriers between voters?
I think, you know, supporting local news is a really important piece. I worked hand in hand in Montana with our local press corps here, and in Georgia with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. The media is the nonpartisan, non-biased arbitrator of these races, and it's really important that you know, the local news, because the national news does not have time to cover 435 congressional districts, continues to be supported, and that people are, you know, reading, getting those newspapers, watching those reports. And you know, I saw firsthand the QAnon conspiracy theories. Our opponent sort of bought into those, and the hate speech that was happening before the January 6th attack on the Capitol, and was very pleased to see, you know, President Bush and many Republicans that I respect, you know, weigh in on those attacks, because it was a scary moment, and it's a scary moment. I'm sure Amanda was also, you know, worried. Those people that we do spend a ton of time with and work long hours with, like, we care about them as people, and so that moment was just really, it affected me in a big way. That, like, you know, the Parler and like these places that are on the internet that people are just reading, you know, their own news, and it's sort of an echo chamber, how much that sort of boiled up into, you know, a terrorist attack.
I'll jump in and say that, you know, with social media and, you know, the prevalence of social media now versus 10 years ago, you do see a lot of polarization that happens. You know, people are going to follow other like-minded people, and you see that polarizing aspect start to occur. And I think at the end of the day, as individuals, we need to be open-minded and understand that it's okay for somebody else to have a different opinion. But I encourage people to, have conversations and understand where other people are coming from, and not necessarily believe that if their view is different, that it's an attack on them. But, just encouraging a civil discourse, whether it starts with friends or family, or online. I think social media causes a lot of polarization amongst individuals.
Okay, whoever wants to go first on this, what do you believe is the future for your respective parties?
Yeah, I think, the future of the Democratic Party is about showing up and listening to people about what they need to succeed, sort of the same as it's always been. Whether we're talking with people in Eastern Montana or the Atlanta suburbs, people generally want the same things. They want good paying jobs, infrastructure they can depend on, and a better future for their kids. And I'm excited to see Jamie Harrison at the DNC, like a hard race in South Carolina. I think he knows how to talk to a plethora of voters and from different communities and different districts. And I'm, hopeful that we can find more people like Mike Mansfield to run for office, or Carolyn. She works with Republicans and Democrats and has Republican friends. Like, I think that joining the Problem Solvers Caucus was one of the first things she did when she got to Congress, and that's bipartisan group of lawmakers who are addressing these issues, and it also makes them more effective. Carolyn was the first freshman member of Congress to pass something through the House of Representatives this year, and she did it, and it was bipartisan. I think making sure that we're electing folks that have that tact, Senator Tester, Governor Bullock, I think all had that ethos as well, is we have to work across the aisle in Montana because you are required to, but people that want to do that because they know that it makes their governing and legislating stronger.
And as far as the Republican side, I think you've already seen a lot starting to shift. We've elected a record number of women and veterans to Congress. I think that's something that you'll see continue to happen, and really kind of broaden our outreach and connecting with people, and really kind of talking about how we share values and, enjoy our personal freedoms and, really kind of, foster a country where, we can continue to excel and develop.
Okay, so this question is a little bit focused for Shelbi, but Amanda, if you have thoughts on it, I'd love to hear those as well. Shelbi, I don't have to tell you, in Montana in 2020 November, there was a red sweep for statewide and federal offices in the state. And so this is from a viewer who wants to know, why are Democrats losing in rural areas?
Yeah, a good question. I think it's sort of the same reason that Republicans are losing in suburban and urban areas, is that the voters in those areas don't think that they're being talked to or represented in the right way. Georgia's 7th district originally was in 2010 was gerrymandered. And in fact, when a reporter asked the incumbent Republican at the time, Rob Woodall, in 2018, if he was worried that he might get beat, he actually responded on the record, no, that's what gerrymandering is for. But clearly the district outgrew its gerrymander. It became a Republican freefall in the Atlanta suburbs. And I think we saw these young families in these rapidly diversifying districts didn't think they were being well represented by Republicans. I think on the reverse, we can look at Senator Tester on ways that Democrats can build back a relationship with rural voters. And you do really see rural parts of Montana and other states, specifically in Indian country, deliver for Democrats too. So I don't want to, I don't want to answer this question without talking about how crucial Indian country, which is rural, is for the success of the Democratic Party, especially in Montana. And then the other thing is, I think we can look to some issue area wins in Alaska and Idaho. They've had some big conservation wins. In both of those states. Alaska is actually trending towards Democrats in the last decade. And I think it's, Amanda talked about this at the beginning, some deep canvassing. They've invested in year-long year-round organizing work to have longer-term conversations with folks rather than sort of like the churn and burn of the candidate campaigns. But yeah, I mean, I think we can also look to Biden's own campaign. He had the best showing for a Democrat in Alaska since 1964. And I think really what we're doing is we're talking to people on issues that matter to them. Like I think public lands was a big one in Senator Tester's reelection campaign. And we saw, you know, rural voters did vote for him in that race. So.
Amanda, do you have any thoughts on that you want to answer? And even to the point that Shelbi made, that there's a perception that Republicans are struggling in urban areas.
So I think it comes down to the district and the issues at hand. You know, if it's a rural district that is more agricultural based, you know, that's something that I think Republicans are able to successfully message on, and, you know, supports policies that support the farmers. So, you know, you have a lot of different instances like that. I think in urban areas, you know, one thing that Republicans can do is, you know, better organize there. I think we can absolutely have the conversation with those voters there to really sway them and think that, you know, they can support a Republican. So I wouldn't necessarily, you know, write off rural areas for, you know, just Republicans and not Democrats. But same thing for urban areas too. I think at the end of the day, it comes down to, you know, the candidate, the fundraising, and how you're able to, you know, talk to the voters and have that conversation with them about issues that they care most about.
What do you, this is from a viewer, what do you think of ranked voting and how might that impact campaigning?
I'll explain ranked voting briefly so that everybody knows what it is. Basically, it's like the top two vote getters. So it's like a jungle race. There'd be a bunch of people in the race, and the top two vote getters would move forward no matter the party. I don't know that I have a strong opinion on ranked choice voting. I think California maybe has it in some places. But ultimately, I do think just like the best campaign and the best like authentic candidate will win these races. And I'm not sure that the sort of that function will matter as much.
I'm inclined to agree with Shelbi on that as well.
Okay, and so, you know, with we're covering the Montana legislature here right now, but, you know, there are a rash of laws currently being considered across the country. And this viewer wants to know, what are your perceptions of some of these laws being proposed that are perceived as suppressing voters, or I know some of the ones here, voter ID laws, those kinds of things.
I think they're particularly egregious. I was cracking up at the members of Congress who were on record saying that the election was stolen and then also were sworn in. It was like you were elected on that ballot. But I think, you know, voting rights and access to our democracy is like the most basic part of campaigns and politics and a fair playing field. I think that, you know, if you're going into a campaign and thinking, I'm going to try to make sure that less people can vote, you should be looking at, you know, why is that the case? Because if everybody voted, you know, I think that my candidate or my values would be the better way to go about that, because then it's an issue about values and not about disenfranchising voters. And, you know, Montana has some good election laws, and I hope they stay in place. But you know, we have same-day voter registration. It should be easy for people to vote. And that I think, you know, is a value of you know, Mike Mansfield and Senator Tester, and I think we see that from our national leaders, Biden as well. In Congress right now, there's the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which would continue to federally enfranchise voters who And that was mostly repealed, but it was there to protect Black voters after the civil rights movement. And it has been gutted in recent years. And so to honor him and his work in Georgia and as a civil rights icon, they named that act after him. But I think that, federally protecting voters is going to be a really important piece as state legislatures continue to litigate this issue.
And I think it's important that we encourage every person that's eligible to vote to be able to vote. That's our civic duty. It's something that I'm passionate about. Even if, a friend of mine doesn't necessarily support the same ideals or the same candidate that I support, I still want to see that person turn out to vote. Again, that's your civic duty. Is something that I'm passionate about, which is why I work in politics. At the end of the day, I think we have certain checks and balances to make sure, that people are able to vote, but are also voting properly. But again, I think everyone should have, the ability to vote that's eligible. And I encourage people to vote even in off-year elections.
And we talked a little bit earlier about voting for issues versus party. This is similar, but someone wants to know, how do we engage with people to vote for the candidate, not the party? And I think that's where we see those swing voters come in. Amanda, do you want to start this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the end of the day, a candidate is an individual. They have to be able to be an individual and not necessarily just resemble the party. That doesn't necessarily mean that, all of their views are different than the political party. But at the end of the day, they have to be an individual. And I think that's where it comes down to making that personal connection with the voter. Having that face-to-face time, putting a face to the candidate that they're seeing on TV, and also talking about, the issues that that person is most concerned about that might not be the talking points on television.
Yeah, I agree. I think trying to cut through, the noise and the nationalization of these races and talk about issues specific to where you're running. So whether it's about the school board or about, county specific challenges that they're facing, or if it's a state, what are Montanans facing. And then I think it's investing in long-term movement building, where you're training people to organize in their communities, not only around candidates, but around like local issues, clean air and water, housing and homelessness. I also think that's where you get the best candidates. Like the people that are doing the really hard work in their communities right now should be in Congress. And the more that we can support those people that are doing that local organizing work and elevate them, we'll make sure that they know best what their community needs, and they're going to have a direct line to, serving those people in the best way that they can.
Okay, one viewer wants to know, what do you do in the off season if there is one? And what are the next campaigns you're interested in managing?
I'm getting some sleep right now. I am relaxing. I'm hanging out with my dog and I'm going on some hikes. I don't know. I think there's a lot of interesting races to cycle. There's a lot of awesome Senate races and governor's races. I'll sort of go about it the same way I always do, which is talking to a lot of them and seeing what inspires me. But I will say, Amanda, I hope you agree, this industry is recession and pandemic proof, which makes me feel good. There's always the need for some people willing to hit the road. And this work is really hard. And so, having like a break time or, doing some like campaign consulting with other friends and other races has been fun, because it's sometimes not always so fun to be the manager, and taking a break or taking a back seat is really fun in the off cycle.
Yeah, I absolutely love this question. So as Shelbi mentioned, rest is very important. Usually we don't have a lot of downtime between cycles, but another thing that I love doing is obstacle course races. I love like Spartan races, doing things like that. I can challenge myself as an individual mentally, doing these sort of things. So that's something that I like to do when I can during the off cycle. Moving forward, there's going to be a lot of top target congressional races that are occurring again this year. Republicans are 5 seats away from taking the majority. So I know there's going to be a lot of opportunities there, also considering some statewide opportunities as well.
Okay, so we're running out of time here, but to kind of wrap up this conversation, I'm wondering if you guys, I'm going to put you on the spot, if you could tell us the best voter engagement story you've experienced. Think about it for a second. We should have some Jeopardy music. Whoever gets it first.
Yeah, I've had a lot of great voter engagement, just like knocking on doors in Eastern Montana and rural Montana is always fun because people sort of don't expect you to be out there. I remember I was east of Billings. I don't remember the town I was in at the time, but we were knocking doors and I talked to a woman and her husband. And they were definitely Republicans, and we talked about Senator Tester's 13 bills that had signed into law by President Trump. And it was a great conversation. I don't think they voted for Senator Tester, but out of it, I did get 3 pounds of rhubarb. So always a fun time to canvass in Eastern Montana.
Amanda, any rhubarb for you?
No rhubarb, but I do love rhubarb, so I'm a little jealous. I guess to kind of touch a topic of annoying voters, one story that I have, which is probably boring, but it was during the primary. Somebody returned a phone call to our office and they were very upset, but they said that they were voting for the candidate and they begged us to please stop calling them. So at the end of the day, it paid off annoying them, but they were in fact very annoyed. So.
Okay, I lied. I have one more insider question because I am always curious for folks who are on the road, especially on campaigns. Is there a food, like a fast food, that you are so sick of from eating on the campaign trail that you won't touch anymore?
Pizza.
I always have to take like a 2-month break from pizza.
Yes.
like November, December, part of January, I'm like, I get that pizza away from me. But I'm back. I have eaten pizza recently, so it's been enough of a time for a break.
All right, well, we are going to wrap up. That's all the time we have tonight. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your evening to join us for this dialogue, and especially thank you to Amanda and Shelbi and Denise for translating this for us in sign language. It's been a great conversation, and I want to remind our viewers that the next Mansfield Dialogue will be next Wednesday at 7 p.m. That dialogue will feature U.S. Ambassador to Vietnam, Dan Crittenbrink, on shifting foes to friends in a conversation moderated by Missoula's Mike Halligan. Again, that is next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Thanks again and have a wonderful night.